Within the history of the Vatican, one subject remains quietly unspoken: angels. Their presence remains remembered, yet certain tales hint that they inspired more fear than reverence. They weren't like the gentle figures depicted on church windows. They resembled more guardians, rebels, beings the church has never fully embraced. Their names appear only in forbidden notes and sealed archives. If you're intrigued by such mysteries, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let the silence guide you deeper into history. It doesn't begin with lightning or flames, but with a whisper. A whisper that moves like a breath of air through marble halls, too delicate to echo, too unique to be forgotten. Under the vast dome of St. Peter's Basilica, where light filters through ancient stained glass windows and candles flicker by golden altars, something older than silence waits patiently. Angels are said to bring peace, to guard believers, to be creatures of pure light sent from heaven. Yet, inside the Vatican, the story is more complex. Because there are parts of that story that the Church doesn't openly share, parts protected behind old wooden doors, kept in places where sunlight never reaches. This isn't a story told during Sunday sermons or written in children's books. It's a story that lives in the silence, in the heart of Vatican City, behind white robes and Latin chants. Some believe the Church has been guarding something for centuries that it can't fully explain, not just relics, bones, or old manuscripts, but knowledge. Hidden knowledge, forbidden knowledge, and much of it is about angels. There are stories whispered in private rooms, spoken softly by old men whose hands shake when they talk about them. They tell of visions that appeared without warning, of names spoken that made candles go out without any wind, of dreams shared by people who had never met. And the same delicate but sharp question always remains. Why does the Vatican fear the very beings it teaches us to trust? The answer, it's whispered, lies in the archives no one can touch, in manuscripts copied only once, then sealed forever, in paintings covered with cloths, and in songs no longer sung. Because not all angels bring comfort. Some bring knowledge, some bring fire, and some, if they truly arrived, would leave more questions than faith can answer. A long time ago, a pope found himself alone in the room of tears. He had just been chosen, his name still new in the air, when he felt something behind him, a sound like wings closing. He turned, but the room was empty. Later, he wrote in his personal diary, "It wasn't a peaceful presence, it was a warning. We are not allowed to know everything." That diary wasn't meant to be read, but the whisper found a way out, and so the whisper under the dome continues. It moves through dim corridors, it slips through the cracks in the stained glass windows. It doesn't shout, it doesn't warn, it just waits. Like an unsolved question, tonight we will chase that whisper, not to prove or deny, not to fear or worship, but to listen and to wonder what might still be hidden in the space between heaven and earth. They watch constantly, as the old texts describe them. They don't speak, they don't move, they just watch silently, still and full of something too intense to be put into words. In the Bible and in the Church's oldest writings, angels appear suddenly, not as sweet-faced creatures with golden wings, but as something much more unique. In early Christian stories, angels took different forms. Some appeared as humans, others had too many wings or eyes that never closed. They were between heaven and earth, divine messengers who brought warnings or gave strength to the weak. But they were never gentle, never simple. The word angel means messenger, but not all their messages brought peace. Some brought fear, some brought change, and some brought silence. The kind of silence that fills a space long after all noise has gone. The Vatican teaches that there are 9 orders, or levels, of angels. From the lowest to the highest, they stretch like a ladder to heaven. At the top are the seraphim, closest to God. At the bottom, the angels who walk beside us, invisible but present. In between are the cherubim, thrones, dominions, powers, virtues, principalities, and archangels. Each group has its job. Some bring messages, some protect nations, some serve only God, never looking away from his presence. And yet, through the centuries, one thing has stayed the same. They rarely speak, and when they do, their words are often wrapped in mystery. Church writings often talk about their silence. It's not a silence of weakness or fear, it's the silence of watching, of knowing, of being separate. In religious art, angels are often shown with serious faces. They don't smile, their hands open, their eyes wide. It's said they never sleep, that they see everything, that they know more than us about what's to come. Some priests believe angels don't speak because they don't need to. Their presence is already a message. Others say they do speak, but only to those who truly listen. Everyone else just feels the wind. In the darkest corners of the Vatican, there are stories of guardians who never leave, of winged figures seen standing still in shadowy chapels long after the last prayer has been said. No words, no sign, just that deep, watchful silence. One day, a Swiss guard told a story he should never have shared. It was deep night. He was standing by the wall of the basilica when he saw a very tall figure above the dome with folded wings and head bowed. He looked again, and there was nothing there, but he still remembers the feeling it left him, like being recognized without a word. These are the silent guardians. They don't come to be praised, they don't ask for prayers. They are where we cannot be, between what we understand and what we will never understand. And maybe that's why the Church is careful, because when something watches in silence, maybe it's also waiting for something. Most churches describe angels as protectors, gentle guides who watch over the faithful and carry prayers to heaven. But the deeper you look into old texts, the more unique their world becomes. Not all angels were meant to be seen, and not all orders were meant to be remembered. The 9 angelic orders are part of an old belief, going back many centuries. They divide angels into groups, each with a specific purpose. Most people only know a few: angels, archangels, sometimes cherubim and seraphim. These are the ones who appear in music, in paintings, in Christmas stories. But what about the others? What about the orders the Church rarely mentions? There are names almost never spoken in modern sermons: thrones, dominions, virtues, powers, principalities. Their meanings are hard to explain. Even church scholars don't agree on how they act or what they represent. Some say thrones carry out heavenly justice, others that powers are soldiers who hold back the darkness threatening the world. And yet, over time, these ideas started to fade. Their names were removed from newer teachings, their stories, once written by monks in flickering candlelight. They were buried in pages now too fragile to touch. Inside the Vatican there are old books written in Latin and Greek that try to describe them, but now they are locked away. Some were read only by the first bishops, then hidden in. He kept his experience to himself, but from that moment he would never again walk that corridor alone. Years later, the Vatican blocked off that passage. It vanished from all official blueprints. No sign marks its location, yet those who work near that section of the archive still whisper about it. Not because of what lies within, but because of what is missing. No records, no names, just a strange footprint left in the dust before the door. Some things are not meant to be disturbed, others are not meant to be discovered. Still, sometimes when the Vatican is silent and the last candle flickers out, you might sense it. An echo beneath your feet, a presence in the stone, unseen but aware, watching, remembering. Seraphim are believed to be the angels closest to God. Ancient writings say they do not walk the earth or deliver messages. They remain by the throne of heaven, their gaze fixed on the divine. Their beauty is not gentle or comforting. It is fire. The word seraphim means the burning ones. They are often depicted with 6 wings, 2 covering their faces, 2 their feet, and 2 for flight. Even in heaven they cannot look directly at God's full radiance. That alone should tell us something. If beings made of light must shield themselves, how blinding must that presence be? The early church rarely spoke of seraphim, and when it did, it was always with caution, always in hushed tones. There was awe, but also a sense of carefulness, as if seraphim were not just holy, but overwhelming. Some saints who claimed to have seen them in visions would fall silent for weeks. One monk wrote that after witnessing a seraph, he could not sleep without a light in his room. He said it was not quite fear, but the sense of being watched. In an old Vatican archive document, a peculiar note appears in the margin of a prayer book, written by a 12th century bishop. It says, "The seraph is not for man to see. It does not speak. It burns, and if looked upon too long, it burns the mind as well." That page is missing. No one knows what followed. There is also a tale among a select group of Vatican scholars, passed down by word of mouth. They speak of a fresco in a private chapel, once accessible only to a few cardinals. The painting depicted a seraph, its wings spanning half the wall, its eyes like open suns. After several visitors fell ill, the chapel was closed and the fresco covered, not destroyed, just hidden. An archivist who worked nearby said being in that room felt like standing too close to a fire. Though the air was cold, he never returned. Why would the Vatican choose silence over seraphim? Perhaps their presence is too immense to comprehend. Or perhaps they remind us that not all things divine are comforting. Some truths are too heavy to carry. Light that blinds rather than guides. Seraphim do not fall. They never leave heaven, but their memory touches earth through dreams, symbols, and sometimes unease. They are not messengers, but flame, and sometimes even faith must turn away from the light. In 325, the city of Nicaea was filled with voices from across the growing Christian world. Bishops arrived in worn robes and dusty sandals, many after long journeys. It was the first great council of the Church, called by Emperor Constantine to bring unity to a divided faith. But not all who attended were summoned by men. The Council of Nicaea is remembered for shaping Christian doctrine. There, the Church affirmed Jesus as truly divine, not merely a man blessed by God. The Nicene Creed was born. Yet, beneath the official story, whispered in the writings of a few, is another tale, one nearly forgotten, seen by only a handful, but too striking to ignore. A bishop, writing years after the council, left a unique note in his personal letters. He described a moment during the debates when the hall fell silent, candles flickered, though no wind blew. A presence entered, he wrote, though no door opened, no footsteps, only stillness. Then, behind the bishop's dais, a figure appeared. No one named it, no one could describe its face, but all agreed it wore light like a robe, and wherever it stood, the marble floor glowed. Some thought it a vision, others a sign from heaven. The bishop did not name the figure, but ended with a line in Latin, "Non omnia hominum judicia sunt." Not all judgments belong to men. This account never entered the Church's official records. Later copies of the bishop's letters omitted the passage, but one ancient copy survived, kept in a remote monastery. In the 19th century, a priest found it, dusty and nearly forgotten, while studying old texts. He tried to make it public, but the Vatican quickly demanded its return. It was never seen again. Other fragments exist. A Greek historian wrote that several bishops left the council early, shaken by what they had witnessed. One even resigned, saying he had looked into eyes not meant for humans. Was it truly an angel? A vision sent to warn or to guide? No one knows. What makes this story endure is not the miracle, but the silence that followed, a silence too deep to be mere forgetfulness. Sometimes history is shaped by those who speak, other times by what remains unspoken. The council gave the world a creed, but perhaps it also received a visitor who needed no words, who watched, then vanished, leaving only light and an unexplainable memory. Long ago there were whispers of a 10th choir of heavenly beings, not 9 as we know today, but 10. These creatures were different, set apart for reasons lost to time. Their name was once spoken in the early church, then gradually erased from prayers, books, and memory. This was the forgotten choir, the Ophanim. In Hebrew, Ophanim means wheels, as described in the book of Ezekiel. They had no human form, no swords or trumpets. They were rings within rings, filled with eyes, moving as if powered by invisible forces. Wherever they went, they moved with the spirit of the divine. They did not speak or stop. They only moved, shining and turning, always vigilant. Some ancient scholars believed they stood at the edge of heaven, guarding what no one else could. They were not heralds or warriors, but protectors of the threshold. It was believed that nothing could approach the divine throne without passing through them. Some even thought they were not angels at all, but something more distant, a form of pure consciousness. At one time their name appeared in ancient lists of angelic orders. Some church fathers wrote of them with reverence, even fear. But by the 5th century their name faded into silence, almost unnoticed. They were not condemned or denounced, simply removed. The Vatican has never explained why. One theory is that their form was too strange, too hard for the human mind to grasp. Eyes within wheels, blazing with light, following every movement. These were not comforting images, but symbols of power and mystery. Perhaps too much mystery. A story passed between two 17th century archivists tells of a cleric who found a manuscript hidden behind a wall in an abandoned church near Rome. It described the Ophanim as guardians of the guardians, watching even the other. At the centre of the chamber stood a smooth stone slab. Resting atop it was an unusual artifact, a golden plate, no larger than a palm. Its surface was etched with figures resembling the cryptic markings on the walls, sharp angles intertwined with graceful curves. When illuminated just so, the engraving seemed to flicker with light. Father Lorenzo reported his find to the church. Within days, the chamber was sealed once again. The entrance was bricked over, and the historian was quietly reassigned to a remote post in the countryside. He died in 1944, never having spoken publicly about what he had seen. Yet his personal journal, discovered much later, described a disturbing dream that haunted him after encountering those symbols. He wrote, "I heard wings, but there were no feathers. I heard singing, but no words." Something ancient lies beneath this palace. Some claim the carvings are angelic wards not meant to summon angels, but to keep them at bay. Others think the room was a sanctuary for someone who had witnessed more than they should have. Whatever the reality, the Lateran keeps its mysteries well guarded, and the chamber remains undisturbed, hidden in the silent stone. There was once a pope who never addressed angels in public, but in his final years he often gazed upward at the ceiling, the sky, or the corners of empty rooms. His name was Celestine V, a gentle, deeply spiritual man whose papacy was brief before he resigned, an act almost unheard of among popes. Many thought Celestine was too pure for the burdens of authority. He favoured contemplation over politics and quiet over speeches. But those close to him noticed a shift near the end of his reign. It was said to have started one tranquil night in the Lateran palace, soon after evening prayers. Years later, a trusted servant recounted a peculiar event. One night, as Celestine prepared for bed, he paused at the threshold of his private quarters, narrowed his eyes and cocked his head as if straining to hear something. In a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Do you hear it?" The servant heard only silence, but Celestine stepped back from the doorway and refused to enter. He stared at the empty room and murmured, "Wings. They have come back." The following morning, Celestine skipped the usual prayer gathering, remaining in his room to write. The papers from that day vanished. 2 days later, he made a declaration that stunned the church. He would abdicate the papacy. He cited frailty and age, but those close to him suspected another reason. A cardinal of the era, in a private letter, wrote that Celestine had begun speaking of nighttime messengers, not visions, not dreams, but a sense of being observed. He said the wings he heard were not comforting, but foreboding. "They do not sing," he confided. "They do not soothe, they remind." After stepping down, Celestine was quietly monitored for the rest of his life. Some say it was for his protection, others believe it was to keep him from revealing too much. He lived simply, in prayerful solitude, until his death. He died in 1300, but an object found beside his bed unsettled those who discovered it. A single, long, white feather laid atop a folded cloth. In his small stone cell there were no birds, no open windows, and no way for the feather to have arrived by chance. The Vatican never addressed the feather, and the cloth was archived deep within the vaults, labelled only with a date and a name. Pope Celestine never claimed to have seen an angel, but night after night he sensed something invisible, moving just beyond the silence. Whatever it was enough to make the Church's highest authority relinquish his power. There exists a book that once stood alongside the Bible, read by the earliest Christians, quoted by saints and esteemed by scholars, but over time it was excluded, omitted from the official canon, and kept from common teaching. This is the Book of Enoch, containing tales of angels the Church seldom discusses. The Book of Enoch is not a secret. It has been translated and published, but is absent from most Bibles. Only a handful of Christian communities retain it in their scriptures, and even among them, it is controversial, for it tells not only of heaven and prophecy, but of angels who defied the order of creation. The Book of Enoch recounts the story of the Watchers, angels sent to oversee earth and guide humanity. But these beings did more than observe. They were captivated by human women and took them as wives. Their offspring were strange beings, giants and powerful creatures called the Nephilim. These children were, according to church doctrine, celestial messengers are bearers of divine messages, servants of God who offer solace and guidance. Yet, on occasion, when they manifest, if they do, there are no words, only an overwhelming quiet. That evening, following the blessing, there was no vision, no sound, just indistinct wings and an unnamed presence. The Vatican has never provided an explanation for what transpired. The chapel where it occurred still stands, though it is seldom visited. Some interpret the event as a sign, while others see it as a caution. Heavenly visitations do not always bring revelations. Sometimes they bring only silence, and within that silence a message lingers, one too profound for words, a message the Church has never fully grasped. There was once a papal letter, never revealed to the world, not misplaced or forgotten, but deliberately consigned to flames, erased in utter silence. Still, its memory drifts through the Vatican's hushed corridors. The year was 1928, a period of profound transformation across Europe. The Church was beset by both political and spiritual challenges. During this era, Pope Pius XI was recognised for his resolute leadership and his concern for the world's trajectory. He felt it was vital for the Church to safeguard its doctrine, especially as unfamiliar spiritual movements and ideas began to emerge. It was then that unusual reports started arriving at the Vatican. Bishops from various nations sent letters describing strange occurrences, individuals claiming to receive messages from celestial beings. Some reported new prayers, warnings, or even unfamiliar names. Others described seeing radiant figures during Mass or sensing their presence in the dead of night. Initially, these reports were simply archived, but as their frequency increased, the tone shifted. Some bishops sought direction. Were these experiences genuine? Were these beings truly from God or something else? Pope Pius V chose to act. He began drafting a letter, not for the public, but for a select group of bishops. According to a secretary who glimpsed it, the letter cautioned against accepting every vision or message as sacred, reminded that even evil can masquerade as light, referenced ancient admonitions from forgotten texts, and urged extreme care with anything not sanctioned by the Church. Yet the letter was never dispatched. The same secretary later recounted that on the eve of sealing the letter, a private meeting took place in the Pope's study. Only 2 cardinals attended. The content of their discussion remains unknown. Afterwards, the Pope took the letter and placed it in the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed it. He remained silent. He exited the room. The ashes were swept away. No copies survived, but the tale of the burned letter was quietly passed down. Some speculate the Pope reconsidered, fearing the warning was too harsh. Others think he worried the letter would provoke more confusion than clarity. There are even whispers that the Pope himself received a message, compelling him to choose silence over speech. Whatever the reality, the letter is now a mere shadow in collective memory. But the questions it raised persist. When a voice claims to be divine, how can we be sure the light is not a disguise? In the quiet blaze of that Vatican hearth, a warning turned to smoke, but the unease it carried still lingers, waiting to resurface. Deep within Rome, behind ancient walls and locked doors, lies a book hidden from public view, absent from any library catalogue, without ornate cover or illustrations. It is plain, bound in leather, and secured in a locked drawer within a Jesuit college. This book is known only by its silent title, the Angelic Index. The Jesuits are renowned for their scholarship and strict discipline. For centuries they have worked alongside the Vatican, defending the faith through study, science, and prayer. Yet, few are aware that the Jesuits also maintain special lists, and among the oldest is a catalogue of angelic names. The Angelic Index was compiled in the 1500s. At that time, many across Europe recorded names they believed belonged to celestial messengers. Some heard them in dreams, others found them in ancient manuscripts or during moments of intense prayer. A few names matched those in Scripture: Gabriel, Michael, Raphael. But many were unfamiliar. Some, the Jesuits believed, were perilous. The Church teaches that only a handful of angelic names should be spoken, those found in holy texts. But the index contains hundreds more. Names absent from any public record, names said to possess power, names that, if uttered, might summon forces beyond comprehension. The Jesuits collected these names not for use, but to shield others from them, recording each name, its origin, and any known effects. Some were marked in red ink, signifying they should never be spoken, not even in prayer. Others were flagged for caution. Some entries offered no explanation, just a name and a warning. One faded Latin note reads, "Spoken once in Seville, 3 collapsed, do not repeat." Another recounts, "Dreamed by a nun in Milan, the room filled with light, she awoke blind." These accounts were never made public. The index remained secret, shared only among trusted members of the order. In the late 1800s, a Jesuit named Father Emilio attempted to publish a portion of the index. He felt the faithful should know which names were safe and which were not, but his superiors intervened. He was removed from his post, and the printed pages were destroyed. No copies survived. The Vatican has never acknowledged the index's existence, but scholars who have worked with the Jesuits quietly admit to having seen it, not read or handled, but glimpsed the old leather cover and its lock. The Angelic Index is not a prayer book, but a safeguard, a record of names that once illuminated the heavens, now consigned to darkness, waiting to be forgotten or remembered too vividly. Adjacent to the Sistine Chapel is a small, seldom-seen chamber. It is unadorned, tranquil, and bathed in dim light. This is the Room of Tears, where a man becomes pope. After the white smoke rises and the bells toll, the new pontiff is led here alone. He is given a moment to mourn, to pray, and to don the white vestments that signify his new role. The room is steeped in profound silence. For many popes, it is the most intimate moment of their lives. Yet, in 1963, that silence was unexpectedly broken. That year, Cardinal Giovanni Montini had just been elected Pope, soon to be known as Paul VI. Those who knew him described him as gentle, reflective, and quietly strong. But upon entering the Room of Tears, something occurred that would mark him forever. A Swiss guard stationed outside later recounted a peculiar incident. He claimed that moments after the door closed, he heard soft footsteps, then silence, then a calm, low voice say, "Do not call them by name." The guard thought someone else had entered, but when the door opened, Paul VI was alone. He appeared pale, as if he had not slept for days, though only minutes had passed. He said nothing, merely gestured to the guard and left. Later, a close confidant revealed that something had deeply disturbed him during his first hour as Pope. When pressed for details, the Pope simply said, "I was not alone in that room." He never elaborated. No recording of the voice exists. No official account was made, but for the remainder of his papacy, Paul VI spoke of angels with great restraint. He avoided discussing them in sermons, never uttered their names during Mass. In private, he once confided to a bishop, "Even light must be tested." Some Vatican scholars believe that voice was a warning, that in a moment of immense spiritual gravity, something from beyond approached, not to bless, but to caution. The Church teaches that not all beings are sent by God, even if they appear holy. The Room of Tears remains unchanged, the chair, the mirror, the folded garments, all awaiting the next pope, but since that day, each new pontiff spends less time there than his predecessor. Perhaps they sense the weight, perhaps they sense a presence. Whatever befell Paul VI that day, he bore it for the rest of his life. A single phrase spoken in a place meant for prayer, not shouted, not whispered, but stated as an undeniable truth. Do not call them by name. There is an old belief, long suppressed and rarely discussed, that celestial messengers once walked so closely with humans that they left more than messages. They left descendants. The Church avoids this topic, and for good reason. The notion that angels could impart more than visions is perilous. It raises profound questions about nature, spirit, and the boundary between heaven and earth. Yet, the belief has never vanished. It has been whispered in monastery corners, scribbled in the margins of forbidden texts, passed down in stories too strange for sermons. The Book of Enoch recounts the Watchers, celestial beings who descended to earth and took human wives. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were giants of great power and wisdom, born from a union that should not have been. The Church does not include this tale in the Bible, but has never denied its existence. In the Middle Ages, some groups claimed that the blood of these ancient children still flowed in certain families, believing that a few individuals with unusual gifts or deep intuition bore traces of angelic heritage. It was said these people could perceive what others could not, hear music without a source, or speak unknown languages. Some were even credited with healing abilities. The Church deemed such ideas dangerous. To suggest that a human could possess angel, they descend from the heavens and disappear as swiftly as they arrived. Could it be that the Vatican Observatory is not merely observing creation, but also anticipating the return of something ancient? The files remain sealed. Most who work there speak only of science. But deep within the quiet observatory, records lie dormant, preserving dates, photographs, and handwritten notes. Not just of stars, but of moments when something unknown gazed back at us from the sky. And the Vatican, in its silence, continues to watch. It all began as a quiet prayer meeting. In a small village near the French border, in the spring of 1921, a group of women gathered in the fields at dusk, as they had every evening for weeks. They recited the Rosary, praying for peace after the long suffering of the Great War. That night, the sky above them began to glow. At first, it was faint, like the last golden glimmer of sunset, but then it grew in intensity. A figure began to appear within that light. It stood tall, wrapped in a white gown, with something like a crown on its head. Its hands were open. It didn't speak, but its presence brought tears to those who saw it. The women believed it was the Virgin Mary. The news spread quickly. In a few days, pilgrims arrived from neighbouring villages. Some claimed to have seen her too. Others said they heard singing, even though there were no choirs nearby. The church sent 2 priests to observe. They stayed 3 nights, and although they saw no figure, they admitted hearing strange sounds in the wind. Reports were sent to Rome, and a small group of investigators quietly formed. At first, the Vatican treated the episode as it would any other possible Marian apparition. They studied the people, investigated the history of the land, and asked deep questions about the vision. But something about that figure didn't fit the pattern of previous Marian apparitions. The crown wasn't like those usually depicted in sacred art. It was made of rings, almost like a halo wrapped in fire. The gown glowed, but not with delicate colours. It was almost too bright to look at directly. Most unusual of all, no one reported ever hearing her speak. Mary, in past visions, had always offered words, warnings, comfort, prophecy. But that figure remained silent one night. A young man from the village brought one of the priests an ancient volume. It was a copy of a rare, long, out-of-print religious text. At its centre was depicted a seraph belonging to the highest angelic order, famous for its fiery splendour and closeness to the divine. That figure resembled the apparition in the fields. Afterward, the church changed its approach. The religious were withdrawn from the village, the Vatican closed the investigations, and discreetly suggested to the local bishop to stop promoting the event. The site never received official recognition. No sacred place was built. Decades later, among the papers of one of the original investigators, a letter appeared. It read, "We were sent to find Mary. I believe we discovered something else. Magnificent, certainly, perhaps divine, but it was not her, and it wished to remain hidden." The church never explained that decision. For many faithful, that vision remains a moment of blessing, but for those who investigated further, the muteness of that presence persists. Sometimes, not all light is meant to be understood. In a small, quiet church, under a hill in central Italy far from the Roman crowds, lies a sealed slab beneath the floor. No indication, no inscription, and yet, for those who know the story, it represents one of Christianity's deepest secrets. It is said that beneath that slab lies a sword, not made by earthly craftsmen, but received directly from heaven. The tradition begins with the Archangel Michael, the great defender of the Church. In sacred texts, he is described as the warrior angel, the one who cast the dragon out of paradise, the one who guards believers. Over the centuries, temples and sacred places were built in his memory, especially where mysterious flashes or apparitions appeared. One of these places is the sanctuary of Monte Sant'Angelo. In the year 590, a local bishop claimed that Michael had appeared to him inside a cavern. The angel declared that the cavern was already consecrated and that no mortal should bless it because he himself had chosen it. A basilica was built there deep within the mountain, and faithful from all over Europe came to pray within those rocky walls. But hidden in the writings of later religious figures is a story never publicly revealed. It tells of a sword, long and luminous, discovered inside the grotto one dawn after a violent storm. No one understood how it got there. It was rust-free despite the humid air, unlike any known model. The hilt bore unusual signs, circles, stars, and an emblem of wings. The sword was taken to Rome, personally carried by the bishop, and shown to the pontiff. After observing it, the Pope only said, "It does not belong to man, but to the messenger." He ordered it to be hidden, placed beneath the altar of a modest chapel not far from the Vatican. There it remained, sealed in rock, known only to a few cardinals. Towards the end of the 19th century, a young seminarian claimed to have discovered a reference in a reserved Vatican document. The document described it as the blade of fire that does not consume. He was then transferred to a mission in South America, and the manuscript he mentioned disappeared forever. Today, the Vatican does not mention the sword. Some argue it was simply a relic passed down by warriors or rulers. Others believe it was never meant for mortal hands, but was a luminous weapon reserved for the angel who originally wielded it. And so it lies, if the tales are true, deep within the stone, in a little frequented chapel, in stillness, a celestial gift hidden by those who feared its power. Not all sacred realities are meant to be seen. Some exist only to wait. There was a time when angels communicated frequently. In the Bible, they delivered messages, gave warnings, and even called people by name. They announced to Mary that she would have a son. They ordered Joseph to take refuge in Egypt. They appeared in dreams and visions, always with a clear and intentional tone. But now something has changed. In the contemporary world, angels rarely communicate. In the chronicles of the ancient church, it was said that angels guided, comforted, led. But whoever carefully examines these chronicles perceives something particular. As time passed, angels became more silent. Their voices faded, their appearances became rarer, and when they did manifest, they often remained mute. Today, in the rare cases where someone still claims to see them, muteness is the most frequent element. Luminosities, movements, or the perception of a presence are described, but no voice, no announcement, only stillness. Some believe this is because the world has changed. Before, people listened differently, believed with greater spontaneity. A voice in the night would not have been ignored. Now the din of the world drowns out contemplation, and perhaps angels simply await souls quiet enough to hear them again. Others believe the muteness is intentional, that angels are still here, still watchful, but have been ordered to keep silent, that a long time ago a separation was drawn between the divine and the earthly, and angels were withdrawn into the darkness, not out of anger, but out of prudence. There is an ancient document kept in the Vatican Library. It is rarely displayed, and its title is not openly spoken. Inside is a single sentence, written in Latin, which roughly translates to, "They are still among us, but their mouths are sealed." The author remains unknown. The page is ancient, but the message is clear. What was once permitted is now forbidden. In certain monasteries it is said that the purest religious sometimes perceive the presence of angels during deep prayer. A warmth in the room, a luminosity that flickers without flame. But even these religious declare they perceive no words. Only the weight of something sacred dwelling nearby, like the stillness before a great bell rings. Perhaps angels do not speak because it is no longer necessary. Perhaps their announcement was given long ago, and now it is up to us to respond. Or perhaps they remain mute because their words, if spoken now, would be too powerful, too hurtful, too immense for human souls. The Vatican offers no explanations. It teaches that angels still exist, that they still serve and guard, but it rarely speaks of them in detail and never of their muteness. So we wait and wonder. In the quiet moments, in the still spaces of the night, we wonder why they no longer speak. And in that muteness, perhaps, we discover the message they have left. Yet not every visitation is a blessing, and not every set of wings brings comfort. Many years later, an unsent letter was discovered among Father Matteo's belongings. In it, he confessed, "I invoked the name of a saint, but what responded was not happiness." There was only silence, and in that moment, I realized that not all light is meant for humankind. The Vatican never interrogated him. They let him remain in that rural house until his final days. All he had witnessed stayed with him, and he never again called upon angels. There is a tale quietly passed among a handful of elderly scholars in Rome about a scroll hidden deep within the Vatican, secured behind 3 layers of protection. It isn't locked away because it's cursed or malevolent, but because of its contents. This is the Scroll of Names. It's said to contain the true names of angels, not just the familiar ones like Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, but others that should never be uttered, names absent from any public scripture. Names that, if spoken with unwavering faith, might draw the attention of entities not of this world. No one knows for certain where the scroll originated. Some claim it came from a desert monastery in the 6th century. Others believe it was discovered during the Crusades, hidden inside a hollow stone beneath an altar. Regardless, the Vatican quietly took it and concealed it where almost no one could access it. In 1874, a cardinal named Raldi, an expert in ancient languages, was granted a viewing. He left no official report, but in a private letter to a friend, he described the scroll as being made of animal skin so ancient it crumbled at the edges. The ink shimmered faintly as if freshly written. Most of the text was in an alphabet he barely recognized, filled with shapes unlike any known script. Yet, among those strange markings, some names were inscribed with great care. He referenced one in his letter, but that section was burned, leaving only the words, "There was no peace after I spoke it." After encountering the scroll, Raldi abandoned his archival work. He became withdrawn, stopped attending certain masses, and ceased invoking angelic names in prayer. The scroll was wrapped in black cloth, placed in a special chest, and locked in a vault beneath the apostolic archive. Only 3 keys can open that vault, and no single person holds all of them. One is with the Pope, another with the head of the archive, and the third with the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. There are no public records, no photographs, no mention in official documents. But those who work in the archive know that door. They pass it during their duties, but never look at it. Some truths are hidden, not because they are false, but because they are too real, too potent, too close to the threshold of paradise. The scroll of names waits in silence, locked away, not to protect it from us, but to shield us from what it might still awaken. In a modest monastery on the outskirts of the Italian hills, far from city life, a monk began to sense something strange. Brother Tommaso, a reserved man devoted to silence and prayer, would rise before dawn, tend the gardens, and spend hours in the chapel. The priest listened to him intently but said nothing. Later that day, Brother Tommaso was summoned to a private chamber. In a windowless room, 2 men in dark clothing questioned him. They wanted to know if the presence had spoken. He denied it, but his diary, later found among the archives, told another story. He wrote that as he gazed at the apparition, a voice entered his mind, not through his ears, but directly into his soul. It said, "Prepare your souls, the breath of heaven will fade." 2 days later, Pope Gregory XV died. There was no sign of violence or sudden illness. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hands folded on his chest. Everyone said it was expected. He had been unwell for weeks. Yet within the Vatican, someone remembered the prophecy. Brother Giuliano's diary was sealed away. He remained at his monastery but was no longer trusted with copying sacred texts. He returned to gardening and prayer, never speaking of the vision again. Only 1 copy of his diary was made, filed in the apostolic archives under unexplained phenomena. The Church never officially acknowledged it, but some researchers have found subtle references to similar visions before the deaths of other popes. Not always, but often enough to raise suspicions. Was the angel a messenger of death, or merely a silent observer? As time passed, whatever the truth, it came without warning, left no witnesses, and only an echo remained. On a tranquil spring morning in 1968, as the sun rose over Rome and bathed the steps of St. Peter's Basilica in gold, a select group of prelates gathered inside before the crowds arrived. They were there for something rare, a private ceremony involving ancient prayers meant to reach the heavenly realms. The event was not listed on any official schedule. It was arranged in secrecy, with only a handful of chosen guests. Those who attended were sworn to silence after leaving the basilica. The ceremony was described as an experiment, a revival of a tradition lost for centuries. The specifics were never fully recorded. No photos exist, but what happened that morning was forever imprinted in the minds of those present. As the final prayer concluded, the atmosphere shifted. The light through the stained glass warped briefly, and then, without warning, the ground beneath the basilica trembled. It wasn't a typical earthquake, but a deep, unnatural vibration, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The great dome groaned, dust fell from the ceiling, and candle flames flickered violently, though there was no draught. One prelate later said it felt as if something immense had brushed against the cathedral, yet remained unseen. The tremor lasted only 10 seconds, but when it stopped, a profound silence enveloped the group. No one moved or spoke. Gradually, the priest leading the rite stepped forward and closed the ancient book. He offered no explanation. The ritual ended abruptly, and the participants were led out a side door. Within hours, the Vatican's communications office issued a brief statement attributing the tremor to normal geological settling. No damage was reported. Most Romans paid no attention, but within the church the story spread in whispers. Weeks later, one priest who had witnessed the event left Rome for a monastery in Spain. Another resigned early and refused to discuss the ceremony. It was rumoured that the prayer included names not found in the official canon, but drawn from secret older manuscripts, names believed to reach angelic beings directly. Some saw the tremor as a warning. Others thought it was a sign that something ancient had stirred. Not evil, but not entirely benign. A force that should have remained untouched by mortals. Since then, no similar ceremony has been attempted. The Great Dome still stands serene under the Roman sky, but those who were there remember the moment it moved, not from the earth below, but from something above. Deep within the Vatican lies a small room, rarely seen by anyone. It's not on any tour, contains no treasures or frescoes, just stone walls, a single chair, and an old recording device. The room was built in the early 20th century, when the Vatican began using audio equipment to preserve important voices and music. But one recording kept there isn't part of the official archive. It's known only by a faded label, Canis Postumbre, the song after darkness. The story behind this recording is both simple and disturbing. In 1972, a group of technicians was testing new microphones in the Sistine Chapel late at night. The chapel was empty, cloaked in darkness, with only a small lamp by the altar. No clergy were present, no choir scheduled. It was meant to be a routine equipment check before a major event the next day. But as they adjusted the controls and listened through headphones, the technicians heard something unexpected. A gentle song, like a choir softly rising and falling in the stillness. The sound didn't come from any direction, but seemed to fill the entire space. There were no footsteps, no signs of anyone entering, just voices, layered and harmonious, singing perfectly together. Confused, the men stopped their work and searched the chapel. It was completely empty, no one hidden, no sounds from nearby rooms. Yet the melody continued, slow and beautiful, unlike any earthly choir they had ever heard. There are those who claim that in the dead of night, a strange sensation of being observed can overtake you, not from behind or below, but from above, as if the dome itself is watching. The earliest known report dates to 1957, when a night watchman patrolling the outer edges of the square noticed movement atop the dome. He assumed it was a large bird, but it didn't fly. It stayed perfectly still, its outline long and faintly glowing like moonlight. When he looked again, it had vanished. He kept the story to himself, afraid of ridicule. Yet, a few years later, a Swiss guard stationed at the bronze doors recounted a nearly identical experience. He described a sudden chill, looked up, and saw what he could only call a winged figure perched on the dome's rim. In 1973, a visiting prelate from Argentina snapped a photo of the dome at night. When the film was developed, a pale shape appeared near the summit. He thought it was a trick of the light, but others who saw the image remarked it resembled a figure with wings spread wide. The Vatican never addressed the photo. In recent years, similar stories have quietly persisted. Some nighttime visitors claim to see odd shapes perched atop the dome. Others report a sudden, overwhelming sense of awe or reverence beneath it, as if something above is aware of their presence. An old Vatican library manuscript mentions the Watchers, angels sent to observe the world. Some believe these beings never departed and still keep vigil over places of great spiritual power. Could St. Peter's Dome be one of these sites? Many say it's just tricks of shadow and imagination. The dome is high, the lighting deceptive, and the mind sees what it wishes. But for those who have witnessed it, the eyes in the darkness, the silent presence overhead, it's unforgettable. The dome remains unchanged, but perhaps, on certain nights, something else is there too. Not evil, not good, simply present, watching, waiting, and always silent. It was just after midnight on a cool spring night in 1962. The sky above the Vatican was clear, the moon low and silver, casting its glow over rooftops and gardens. The city slept, the bells of St. Peter's silent, waiting for the next hour. But that night, something inexplicable occurred. Suddenly the bells began to ring, first a single deep chime, slow and ominous, then another, and then all the bells together, their sound powerful and resonant, echoing across the square and through Rome's streets. The noise was thunderous, yet the sky was clear, with no storm or wind, only the bells. In the Swiss guard barracks, men leapt from their beds, unsure if it was an alarm. Calls flooded the security post from the surrounding area, people asking why the bells rang at such an hour. There was no answer, no celebration, no scheduled event. When guards reached the bell tower, they found something even more disturbing. The ropes were untouched, no one was there, and the great wooden wheels that moved the bells hadn't turned. The tower was still and silent, yet the bells had sounded. Everyone had heard them. One guard, Lucia, later filed a confidential report. He described a strange pressure in the air, a sudden stillness, as if time itself paused, just before the bells began. The sound, he said, seemed to come not from the tower, but from above it. The Vatican never issued a statement. When journalists asked, they were told it was likely a technical malfunction or a timing error. But the guards knew, and the prelates who heard the bells that night never spoke of it again. Years later, an elderly prelate confided to a young seminarian that it wasn't the first time. The bells had rung in 1799, after Pope Pius VI disappeared, and again in 1918, as World War I ended. Each time, no human hand had touched them. Some say the bells were calling for attention, others believe they warned of something unseen. A presence at the heart of the church, a whisper in a sound too ancient to name. Even now, late at night, guards glance at the tower, and sometimes, when the air is heavy and the city is hushed, they wonder if the bells will ring again. Not by human hands, but by something older and unheard. Beneath St. Peter's Basilica lies a tranquil place known as the Vatican Grottos. This peaceful underground level where popes are buried and pilgrims pray in silence feels thick and timeless. The walls are lined with ancient tombs and faded inscriptions. But deeper still, beyond what most see, there is said to be another chamber, a hidden room not marked on any map, never spoken of openly. The tale of this chamber begins in the early 1970s, when a small crew was sent to repair a cracked wall at the end of a corridor in the grottos. As they worked, they discovered something odd behind a patch of old plaster. Not just a wall, but a sealed doorway, with no handle or hinges, just stone-shaped differently from the rest. After reporting it, the workers were removed from the site. The next day, a team from the Vatican's technical office arrived, bringing no extra tools or paperwork, asking no questions. What happened next was never shared, but one worker, an elderly man named Carlo, kept a private diary. Years later, he confided to a friend what he had seen. When the Vatican team broke through the wall, a narrow staircase appeared, carved into the rock and descending downward. It was perfectly dry, untouched by time, leading to a round, vaulted chamber. Inside, there were no coffins or relics, only a black marble altar and strange symbols traced on the floor. But it was the writing that transfixed him. Deeply carved into the stone, in characters older than Latin, were phrases no one could understand. At the centre of the altar was a symbol resembling an eye wrapped in feathered wings. Someone took a photograph, another wrote notes, but after a few hours, the chamber was sealed again. A new wall was built, and the area declared off limits. Carlo and the others were ordered to keep silent. Over time, rumours spread among the staff. Some said the room was once used for rituals honouring angelic beings before the basilica was built. Others thought early church leaders hid it, fearing its power. There were even whispers of mysterious flashes seen in the grotto after dark, coming from the walled-off section. The Vatican never acknowledged the chamber, but those who heard the story believed the symbols were not warnings, but invitations, as if the space was meant to summon something or someone from beyond reality's veil. And, perhaps, beneath the silent tombs, something still waits in the darkness. In the summer of 1954, Pope Pius XIV left Rome for Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer residence. The town, overlooking a serene lake and surrounded by gardens and quiet streets, was a haven from the city's chaos. For years the Pope had found peace and solitude there, but that summer something unusual happened, quiet, sudden and never fully explained. On the night of August 2nd, just before midnight, the papal guards were told to prepare for an urgent departure. No reason was given. The Pope, who had planned to stay another week, was seen leaving in a dark car after 1 a.m., returning to the Vatican in silence with no official announcement. The next day, Castel Gandolfo was closed to all, even high-ranking clergy. The only clue came from a gardener, who later told a relative that, while trimming hedges near the private chapel that afternoon, he saw a strange glow through the stained glass. It wasn't candlelight or electric, bluish, faint and cold, rising from the altar. It lasted only minutes, then disappeared. Inside, rumours spread that the Pope had entered the chapel alone after dinner, staying nearly an hour. When he emerged, he was pale and moved slowly, saying nothing. That's when the hurried preparations began. No official record explains what happened. The Church only stated the Pope returned to Rome for urgent business. Years later, an archivist found a personal note in the Pope's handwriting never made public. It read, "I was not alone in the chapel. What stood before me wore light as a cloak, but remained silent. I fear I was not meant to see it." The note was dated the night he left Castel Gandolfo. Some believe the Pope saw an apparition. Others think it was something older, an entity the Church avoids naming, a presence tied to places of deep devotion and stillness. Whatever it was, it changed him. In the years that followed, he became more withdrawn, spoke less in public, and wrote more about judgment and the mysterious. The chapel at Castel Gandolfo still stands, but is rarely used and closed to visitors. The glow has not returned, or at least no one has said so. Yet on certain nights, when the wind stirs the lake and the trees are still, locals say, access to this place is reserved for a select few. Most days the atmosphere is hushed, broken only by the gentle sound of pages turning and footsteps echoing on stone floors. Yet, among those who work here, a quiet legend persists, one about what they call the shadow in the mirror. The tale began in the early 1990s, when new cameras were installed in a reading room of the archives. These devices weren't for security, but to safeguard the ancient manuscripts, capturing images slowly as researchers worked. Every evening the footage was checked and archived. One night after closing, a technician reviewing the tapes noticed something strange. In a section of the video, the reflection in a large glass cabinet didn't match the rest of the room. The furniture was all in place, but a motionless figure appeared near the far wall in the reflection, though no one was actually present. The technician rewound the footage. In the main shot, the room was empty, but in the glass, a tall, indistinct figure stood, more shadow than substance. It seemed draped in long folds, perhaps wings, but they were still, and its face was unrecognizable. The recording was shown to a supervisor, copied once, and then locked away. The next day, the cameras were replaced and all mirrors and reflective glass were removed from the room. Officially, this was to protect researchers' privacy, but rumours spread among the staff. Some whispered they'd felt something similar, a fleeting shape in the corner of their eye, a presence in the reflection that vanished when they turned, always near ancient texts about angels, always in the restricted section. A senior archivist quietly remarked, "It only appears in reflections because it's not meant to be seen directly. There was never any official report, no public announcement." Still, the story is passed down among those who spend long hours among the shelves. Even now, when the room is quiet and the lights are dim, some workers avoid turning their backs to the glass, not out of fear, but because of a deeper sense that what peers from behind the veil is neither good nor evil, but simply present and waiting. In the spring of 1981, a scholar named Father Anselmo arrived in Vatican City. Known for his discretion and expertise in ancient languages, his specialty was angelology, the study of angels. He had spent nearly 2 decades searching for lost and forgotten texts. The Vatican granted him rare access to sealed documents in the Apostolic Archive. For weeks, Father Anselmo worked in silence, arriving early, leaving late, and recording everything in a small leather notebook. Colleagues described him as courteous, reserved, and deeply focused. He never asked for assistance or complained, but soon people noticed a change. He grew even quieter, paler, as if he hadn't slept. A guard reported seeing him stand motionless before a locked cabinet, staring at a blank spot on the wall. When asked if he was all right, the priest simply nodded and returned to his work. Then, one morning, Father Anselmo failed to appear. At first, staff assumed he was ill. The guest house where he stayed was checked, but there was no answer. When someone entered his room, they found it empty. His suitcase remained untouched. Clothes were neatly folded on the bed, but his diary, documents, and archive desk keys were missing. A secret search was launched. There was no record of him leaving, and the cameras showed nothing unusual. It was as if he had disappeared without a trace. His workspace in the archive was undisturbed, books open, a pen beside an unfinished page. But on that page was a peculiar drawing, a circle filled with symbols, and at its centre a winged figure kneeling with its back turned. The image was unlike anything else in the archives. No public mention was made of Father Anselmo. His name was quietly removed from the list of authorized scholars. The sealed texts he had studied were locked away again, this time under even tighter security, and staff were told not to discuss the matter. Yet, years later, An elderly archivist whispered that Father Anselmo had been searching for the names of angels said to walk the line between obedience and rebellion. Those who are never named, who only watch, and perhaps, by searching too deeply, he had found one. Today, no one speaks Father Anselmo's name aloud in the archive. His desk sits unused, the books he opened remain untouched, and some say that if you pass by his spot at night, you sense a suspended stillness, not emptiness, but something unexpected. Deep within the Apostolic Palace lies a small room, absent from tours and rarely mentioned in books. It is silent, windowless, and lined with smooth stone. Inside stands a prayer kneeler, a wooden cross, and a single candle that never seems to burn down. This is the chamber of devotion, known to only a few and used most often by one pope, Celestine VI, elected in 1937. Celestine was renowned for his contemplative life and love of silence. While other popes met dignitaries and travelled, he remained within the Vatican, walking the gardens at dawn, speaking little and spending hours in the archives. But above all, he prayed. In his final years, he visited the chamber of devotion almost daily. His assistant noted that the Pope would often leave his bed in the middle of the night, barefoot even in winter, carrying a small notebook and a piece of white cloth. After his death in 1943, the notebook was found beside the kneeler. Its pages were filled with handwritten prayers, brief, almost whispered. Each began, "To those who hold the flame." One read, "I do not ask to see them, I only ask that they continue their vigil." Another, "If their wings must cover the sky, let them not turn their eyes to man." And again, "They are near, let them remain silent." None of these prayers were ever published. The notebook was sealed in the private papal archive. Only a handful of high-ranking clergy ever saw it. But rumours spread. Who were they? What flame did he fear? What had he witnessed to write such words? A cardinal close to Celestine recalled that during a nighttime walk, the Pope confided something odd. "There are prayers people don't know they need. I offer them because something ancient listens from the shadows," he said. The candle in the chamber still burns, replaced only by a single person who has held that duty for decades. The cloth Celestine carried is folded beneath the kneeler, its threads worn thin. Some believe the Pope had a vision, others think he sensed the presence of something beyond comprehension, not evil, not benevolent, simply there, holding a burden too great for humanity. So he prayed, not for protection, but to preserve the silence. That silence lingers in the stone walls, waiting, listening, perhaps still obeying. In the closing days of World War II, an event occurred that forever altered the world. On August 6, 1945, Hiroshima was devastated by an unprecedented force, the atomic bomb. Thousands perished in an instant. The world watched in shock, struggling to grasp the enormity. Yet in the Vatican's quiet corridors, a letter was written days later. It was not for the public. It came from a Jesuit priest, Father Hubert Schiffer, who survived the blast. He lived in a missionary house a few miles from Ground Zero. Miraculously, he and the other priests survived, though everything around them was destroyed. The letter, shared only among a few high-ranking church officials, recounted a strange experience. Father Schiffer wrote that moments before the sky erupted, he sensed a presence between the house and the city. He couldn't see it clearly, but described it as a figure of light with unmoving wings and closed eyes. He felt no fear, only calm. Then the explosion came. Yet the house stood while others nearby collapsed. None of the priests were harmed. Windows shattered for miles, but their building remained. Some called it a miracle, others stayed silent. What made the letter even more mysterious was what followed. For many nights, Father Schiffer dreamed the same dream. He stood in a ruined city, and above him hovered the figure of light. It never spoke, but raised a hand as if to tell him to remain still. He always awoke to the sound of wings in his ears. The Vatican never released the letter. It was filed privately, marked unconfirmed. But copies circulated quietly among those who studied angelic lore. Some wondered if this being was a watcher, an angel sent not to destroy, but to witness, to stand in the moment between life and death. Father Schiffer lived many more years, rarely speaking of his vision, but those close to him noticed he often paused in prayer, glancing upward as if searching for something unseen. No one can say for certain what he saw, but in the church's secret records beside his name is a simple note. Some angels carry swords, others carry silence. Perhaps on that terrible day in Hiroshima, one chose to remain, not to save, not to judge, but simply to witness and remember. In the winter of 1968, something unusual began to occur in several European dioceses. It started quietly, with a few priests mentioning it in private letters, but soon bishops in Italy, Spain, and even Poland reported the same odd experience. It wasn't a vision, but a sound heard in dreams. They all described bells, but not the familiar church bells that mark the hour or call to prayer. These were different, soft at first, like distant chimes on the wind, yet with a tone that was strong and unmistakable. The echo of those bells lingered in the dreams of many, rousing them from sleep just before sunrise. Though never deafening, their sound left a persistent impression, one that felt like a warning, or perhaps a summons. What made these dreams even more disturbing was their recurrence. For numerous clergy, the experience repeated itself night after night, always at the same hour, always with the same tolling, and most of those affected had never crossed paths or shared any connection. In Rome, word of these visions reached a discreet Vatican committee tasked with handling extraordinary spiritual phenomena. They gathered letters, consulted bishops, and even reviewed the Pope's personal logs, searching for any sign that the pontiff too had been visited by these dreams. The findings were kept secret, and no official explanation was offered. One clergyman recorded the bells in his diary, noting they were not rung by human hands. Their call seemed to come from above, or from the depths, not as an invitation to rejoice, but as a reminder, though he could not say of what. A prelate from a Spanish coastal town described seeing a figure in his dream, standing on the shore, with unmoving wings. The bells began to sound as the figure turned its face. No messages or prophecies were received, only that nightly call, which persisted for nearly a month. Then, as suddenly as it began, the visions ceased. The clergy returned to peaceful sleep, but the memory of the call remained vivid for years. Some believed it was a shared vision, a spiritual signal sent to those chosen to hear. Others saw it as a sign, not of disaster or war, but of something hidden, a shift in the unseen world, a message that not all messengers deliver with words. The Vatican never commented publicly, but among certain angelic scholars, a belief endures. When angels act together, they do not always speak. Sometimes their presence is felt only through sound, and so the bells rang, not in churches or towers, but in the dreams of those meant to listen. A call that stirred memory, or perhaps hinted at something yet to come. Centuries ago, in 590 AD, Rome was shrouded in silence and dread. A devastating plague swept the city, leaving the streets empty and the air heavy. Bells tolled more often for the dead than for prayer. Whispers spread that Rome was cursed. Even the bravest avoided the squares, and many clergy hesitated to offer hope. Yet, in the heart of this darkness, something unforgettable occurred. Pope Gregory the Great, new to his office, saw the plague as more than a disease. It was a sign from above. He organised a grand procession through Rome, urging the people to pray not for safety, but for mercy. With heads bowed and voices low, the faithful walked the city, carrying icons and chanting ancient hymns. As the procession neared the Tiber, clouds gathered over Hadrian's mausoleum. What followed is still told today. The crowd looked up in awe. Above the fortress, a figure appeared in the sky. Not bird, not man. Radiant and immense, it hovered with wings spread and sword raised. The figure spoke no words, but slowly lowered its sword as if to sheathe it. The air shifted, the wind stilled, and within days, the plague began to fade. Many believed it was the Archangel Michael, sent to bring relief to the suffering city. Pope Gregory declared that the angel had answered their prayers. The fortress was renamed Castel Sant'Angelo, and to this day a statue of Michael stands atop it, sword pointed skyward. Yet, hidden in ancient records deep in the Vatican library, the story continues. A monk who joined the procession wrote not of a single being, but of many. He described lights forming a ring around the city, and wrote that the sky seemed to hold its breath, as if watched by eyes not of this world. Some believed Rome was not only saved, but encircled and observed, as if besieged not by soldiers, but by silence and wings. The Church remembers only the Angel of Mercy, but some quietly wonder if that day was not just a rescue, but a warning, that when divine beings intervene so openly, it is not always out of kindness, but for reasons beyond our understanding. And so the angel remains atop the fortress, sword raised, not in battle, but in remembrance, watching over Rome, guarding it, or perhaps waiting. Deep within the oldest Vatican vaults, a simple object rests on a marble pedestal. It bears no label and is absent from official records. But those who work in the underground archives know it well. They call it the crystal box, and its origins are a mystery. No one knows how long it has been there. The box is small, about the size of a loaf of bread, crafted from dense, clear crystal that never gathers dust. It has no hinges, no lock, no seams. It simply sits, untouched, behind a rope that no one dares cross. Inside, a single piece of ancient parchment lies, perfectly folded. No one knows what is written on it, for the box has never been opened. What makes the box so strange is not just its contents, but the sensation it gives off. Many describe a subtle pressure in the air, as if the room is heavier than it should be. The light seems dimmer near it, even with the lamps burning. Some say they hear a faint hum, like wind through stone. Years ago, a young cleric tried to examine the box more closely. He approached it alone, late at night without permission. By morning he was found sitting on the floor, pale and mute. He did not speak for 3 days. When he recovered, he requested a transfer to a monastery outside Rome. He never returned. There is, however, an inscription on the pedestal, a Latin phrase in tiny letters. It reads, non explicatum, not explained. Over the years, many have speculated about the box's secret. Some think it holds a letter from a saint or prophet, a message for a future time. Others believe it contains the name of an angel, one never to be spoken. A few even suggest the parchment is blank, and the box's purpose is not to keep something in, but to keep something out. No one has tried to open it again. It remains in its place, deep underground, behind locked doors and guarded keys. Only a handful of trusted staff know how to reach the room. They rarely speak of it. There are no documents, no records, no photos. Only the crystal, the parchment, and the silence that envelops them. And as the years pass, it waits, unchanged, unmoving, perhaps impossible to open, yet always watchful. On a calm spring night in 1972, something extraordinary happened at Vatican Radio. The station, known for broadcasting prayers, gentle music, and messages of peace, was following its usual routine. A recording of evening hymns had just ended, and the announcer's voice faded into background music. Then, at the stroke of midnight, the signal abruptly cut out. For 10 seconds, there was only silence. Not the ordinary pause of radio, but a deep, chilling stillness, as if the world itself had stopped. Then came the scream. The document was brief, just a dozen pages, but every page contained lines that raised more mysteries than they solved. One section cautioned against invoking unfamiliar names. Another described celestial beings appearing without divine command. The most cryptic warning stated that speaking to angels without God's approval could cause a soul to stray and disturb the world's natural order. Why would the Church compose such words and then conceal them? The true motives remain uncertain. Some believe it was drafted after a series of unusual sightings reported by clergy in the late 1950s. Others argue it was a response to the growing fascination with private revelations and unsanctioned worship involving angelic figures. Regardless of its origin, the document was to remain confidential. Only bishops deemed spiritually prepared were allowed to read it, and even they were instructed not to share it, not even with their peers. Rumours suggested that some pages bore Latin annotations, added by scholars who had studied ancient, now-lost manuscripts. The Vatican never officially acknowledged this secret teaching. It was never included in the Church's formal canon law. Instead, it was hidden away in a drawer, buried beneath other files, far from daily reach. Yet whispers about its contents have survived in private conversations and scattered personal notes. A retired bishop, speaking off the record years later, described it not as a frightening text, but a prudent one. It served as a reminder, not everything that glitters is sacred, and not every visitor from above deserves obedience. Some believe the document still lies hidden in the archives, accessible only to those tasked with guarding certain spiritual boundaries. Others claim it was destroyed to prevent confusion, but if those pages ever surfaced again, they might remind us of an ancient, often overlooked truth. Even in a world filled with light, not every voice is trustworthy, and sometimes the Church doesn't just safeguard the truth, it also preserves silence. In the vast, unending quiet of the Egyptian desert, long before cities were dotted with churches and cathedrals, the earliest monks lived. These were the Desert Fathers, men who abandoned everything to seek only God. They dwelled in caves and humble shelters, prayed for hours, and spoke rarely. But when they did, their words carried weight, especially about what they witnessed in their solitude. Among their writings, preserved in ancient scrolls and passed down within secluded monastic circles, is a rare and serious warning. These devoted men, whose only aim was closeness to God, often wrote about apparitions, but not all brought comfort. They recounted encounters with radiant presences at night, surrounded by gentle light and soothing voices. These beings claimed to be angels, addressing the monks by name. Some offered hidden knowledge, others requested prayers in exchange. But the Desert Fathers were cautious. One of the most renowned, Abba Anthony, wrote that when a being of light appears, it should be tested, not welcomed. He advised, "If it flatters you, send it away. If it demands worship, turn your gaze." The true messenger brings humility, not pride. Another monk, Abba Macarius, once saw a shining figure outside his cell. It promised him visions of paradise and power over sin. Macarius knelt, not in adoration, but to seek protection. He later remarked that even Satan can disguise himself in light when it suits him. These early accounts were not forgotten. They were preserved in dusty monasteries and later added to special Vatican collections. Some were translated into Latin and studied by careful theologians. Gradually, a pattern emerged, a warning passed down by those who lived closest to the boundary between heaven and earth. The Desert Fathers believed that genuine messengers never manipulated the mind, never flattered, never promised secret messages. They moved like the wind, felt, but not always seen, and never demanded obedience unless sent by God. As the Church expanded and angels became symbols of comfort, these warnings faded from common memory. Yet, in hidden corners of the Vatican, ancient desert texts are still consulted by a few scholars. Some monks keep them by their beds, pages creased and worn. They do not fear heavenly beings, but they remember what the first saints learned, that brilliance can be a mask, that voices can deceive, and that in the silence of prayer, even in the deepest devotion, not every visitor is welcome. So, when a presence appears in a dream or a whisper is heard in the night, there are still those who pause, recall the desert, and remain silent. Sometimes silence is the wisest response. The papal ring, known as the fisherman's ring, is among the most iconic symbols of papal authority. Each new pope receives one upon election. It is kissed by cardinals, revered by pilgrims, and ceremonially broken with a small hammer upon the pope's death. While the ritual is well known, there is a detail few notice. A nearly invisible symbol, hidden deep within its design. For generations, artisans believed the fisherman's ring depicted only St. Peter casting his net, symbolising the Pope as the spiritual fisherman of souls. But under certain light, especially candlelight, a peculiar mark can be seen along the inner curve of the gold. It is not part of the fishing scene. It is neither a letter nor a number. It is a tiny wing, so finely engraved it resembles a crack unless closely examined. Some say this symbol dates back to the Middle Ages, when Pope Sylvester II added it to his personal ring. He was a learned man, skilled in languages and ancient texts. Legend has it, he once read a scroll describing a divine seal worn on the finger to ward off false messengers. Since then, the wing was discreetly included. Without fanfare, it was passed from ring to ring, not always in the same place. Some rings have it beneath the stone, others along the band, but it is always hidden from plain view. Only in the flicker of a flame does the mark reveal itself, a feathered curve, simple and enigmatic. No official church document explains its meaning. When questioned, Vatican jewelers call it a design tradition. But those familiar with Vatican history know otherwise. They speak of a brief letter found in a forgotten drawer, written in 1187 by a papal advisor. It states that the sign endures, not as an honour, but as a reminder that even the shepherd must watch the skies with caution. Some interpret the wing as a protective charm, others as a warning, a subtle sign that not every shining figure from above is benign. A former Vatican archivist once told a small group of students, "When the Pope kneels in prayer and the candle beside him flickers, the ring responds, the wing appears, not for beauty, but for remembrance." Today, few mention this symbol, and fewer still know it truly exists. It remains a secret, unwritten in any book, never proclaimed from the pulpit, just a silent sign in gold, visible only to those who know where to look, and only when the light is low, like a whisper in the silence, or a feather hidden in the folds of history. On a quiet Sunday morning in 1954, something unusual occurred in one of the Vatican's smallest, most secluded chapels. The chapel of St. Celestine was rarely visited. Tucked away, behind thick walls at the end of a narrow stone-lined corridor, few prayed there, and fewer still remembered its name. That morning, a special service was arranged to honour the archangels Michael, Gabriel and Raphael. A visiting Spanish cardinal who had spent years studying angelic texts requested the ceremony. He believed this chapel, with its faded paintings of winged figures, was the perfect setting. Candles were lit early. The polished marble floor reflected a small group of priests in their vestments, waiting for the bells. The service began as usual. Soft hymns echoed among the stones. Latin prayers rose like murmurs in the air. Then, just after the gospel reading, the candles flickered violently and all went out at once. The room turned cold. The silence that followed was oppressive. A priest later described it as if the chapel had sunk into the earth. Suddenly, the altar cloth caught fire. The flames didn't spread as normal. They didn't scorch the table beneath or the golden crucifix above, only the cloth, a white linen freshly laundered. It burned swiftly, turning to ash in seconds, without smoke or odour. The cardinal stepped forward, his voice steady, instructing the others not to panic. He resumed the prayer where he had left off. The candles relit themselves, untouched by any hand. The remainder of the service was calm, almost serene. But after the final hymn, as the priests prepared, historical records from the 14th century make no mention of this additional presence. The old Vatican guides omitted it, and the official church catalogue of angelic beings did not list a figure with such characteristics. They had discovered a presence that was not supposed to exist. The Vatican discreetly removed the painting from public display. A curtain was drawn in front of the gallery, and only a select few experts were allowed to view it. Rumours began to circulate among the museum staff. Some claimed the painting had altered overnight, while others believed the presence had always been there, unseen until the right moment. A restorer, who left the project soon after, privately shared her experience. She said that presence wasn't observing us, it was looking through us, and I don't think it wanted to be discovered. No official statement was ever released. The gallery reopened with a new exhibit a few months later. The fresco was never displayed again. Even today, the image of the nameless presence remains locked in an underground room of the museum, hidden behind protective cloths and sealed records. Some believe it was a forgotten part of a lost teaching. Others think it was a painted warning, and there are those who wonder if the artist actually painted it. Because sometimes what appears in the corner of a painting is not part of the design, but part of the message. There is a book that very few have seen, and even fewer have truly understood. It's called the Book of Raziel, and it's considered one of the oldest and most mysterious texts ever written about heavenly beings. According to tradition, this book was given to Adam by the angel Raziel himself, shortly after his expulsion from Eden. It was meant to teach the secrets of heaven, the language of creation, and the hidden names of God. It is said that the book passed from hand to hand throughout the centuries. Enoch, Noah, Solomon, each, it is said, guarded it and learned from it. But over time, the Book of Raziel was lost, or at least disappeared from the world's sight. Some believed it had been destroyed, others that it had been hidden, never to be found again. Until whispers began that it had reached the Vatican. No one knows for sure when these rumours started. Some say a rare manuscript emerged in a monastery in Spain in the 16th century. Others claim it was brought to Rome by a secret order of monks who had guarded it for generations in the mountains. Whatever the truth, in Vatican records from the early 18th century, a mention appears of a mysterious book kept in a sealed cabinet under the Apostolic Palace. It was not listed by name, but only with a symbol, a feather resting on a closed eye. Some believe that symbol referred to Raziel, the messenger of mysteries. Over the years, few scholars within the Vatican have hinted at the book's presence. They speak of a leather-bound volume, written in ancient Hebrew, full of strange diagrams and lines that seem to glow in candlelight. One page, it is said, shows a map of the stars, another a list of names no one dares to speak aloud, but the Church has never confirmed its possession. When asked, Vatican officials simply say that there are many ancient books, not all are meant for public reading. A Jesuit who worked in the archives for more than 20 years once told a friend that the book was kept in a locked chest, protected not by guards, but by silence. And he added, "It teaches things that are not for everyone. Even the messengers, in their time, were punished for giving too much." The Book of Raziel, if it truly exists, remains one of the deepest secrets hidden within the walls of the Vatican. A book born to teach, but one that could reveal too much. Because knowledge, especially that which comes from above, can be both light and fire. And in the heart of Rome, where history and mystery walk hand in hand, some pages are still turned only when the world sleeps, in silence, with caution, and never aloud. There is a story that only a few have heard, and even fewer have truly believed. It speaks of a last group of heavenly beings, a choir not mentioned in any official book, never named in any public sermon. Some call it the choir of the end. Unlike the 9 choirs of ecclesiastical tradition, seraphim, cherubim, thrones, and so on, this choir does not sing in heaven. It does not surround the throne of God. It waits in silence, beyond time, beyond light, and according to whispered texts guarded in the heart of the Vatican, it will not move until the final day. The first mention of this hidden choir dates back to a group of scrolls found in a monastery in the Syrian desert. The scrolls were written with faded ink by a hand trembling with age or fear. One passage says that when the stars grow cold and the gates fall silent, they will rise and sing the last song. That single sentence was enough to disturb the monks who read it. They sent the scrolls to Rome under the veil of night. Once they arrived at the Vatican, they were placed in the reserved section of the Apostolic Archive. Few scholars examined them. One theologian in a private letter called them the most unsettling verses I have ever read. Another maintained that these scrolls matched parts of a forbidden chapter of the Book of Enoch, long excluded from official teachings. The idea of a final choir was considered dangerous. If such a group existed, it meant that not all messengers had revealed themselves. It meant that something was still waiting. And, more than that, it meant that the end would not just be a moment of judgment, but of song. The Vatican never spoke openly about it, but silent changes were made. In the early 20th century, a mural that was supposed to depict the 9 choirs was modified. A section was covered. A 10th presence, visible in the first sketches, was removed before the final version. Even today, in a small private prayer room near the Lateran, at dusk, a faint murmur can sometimes be heard. Visitors say it sounds like breath passing through stone or wind through dry leaves. A guard described it as a song not yet sung, but already known. No one knows what the sound of the choir of the end will be. No one knows what its song will do. But the idea remains, hidden in the minds of those who study the ancient ways, that there are heavenly beings yet unseen, and that when they finally speak, the world will listen. Because not all songs bring peace. Some are made to close history. There is a room under the Vatican that almost no one knows about. It doesn't appear on any map. It's not mentioned in any guide. Even within the church, its name is only spoken behind closed doors. The priests who know about it simply call it the last room. This hidden chamber is said to be located beneath the oldest part of the Apostolic Palace, beyond several locked doors and narrow stone corridors that twist like roots under the city. It is sealed with 3 locks, each one held by a different man. One key belongs to the Pope, another to the prefect of the Vatican archives. The third is guarded by a man whose name is never written. He is chosen in secret and known only to the other 2. No one can open the room alone. There are no windows, no lights, just stone walls, a table, and a single object in the centre, covered by a cloth that hasn't been lifted in over 100 years. What lies beneath the cloth is not fully known, but ancient writings suggest it is the first vision ever recorded by the Church, not a vision written with words, but shown in form, an image, a presence, something that is not entirely human nor entirely divine. The story of the last room survives only in fragments. A note in a cardinal's diary from 1789 speaks of a chamber guarding a truth not ready to emerge. Another letter, written during the Second Vatican Council, alludes to a document that was read only once, then returned to the room without being copied. Some say the room was built after a pope received a message from a being of light. He was told to prepare a space that no one would enter until the right time. That time, he wrote, would not come when the Church was ready. However, When humanity stopped truly listening, an archive custodian reported finding himself in front of that door. He spoke of an unusual feeling, as if the atmosphere had thickened, similar to stagnant water at the bottom of an ancient well. No sound reached his ears, and yet his heart pounded in his chest, and he turned back before reaching the end of the passage. There are no images, no illustrations can be made, and the cloth hiding what lies in the centre has never been changed. The last chamber remains sealed. Its mysteries still wait. Perhaps it should never have been opened, or it will only be opened once when everything ends, at the moment when silence prevails over voice and the oldest question returns, not the one we believe, but the one whispered to us before belief was born, before voices, before existence, before dawn. In the depths of the Vatican, far beyond the marble floors and gold-lined halls, there is a forgotten crypt. It doesn't appear on official maps, and even many employees who serve within those sacred walls are unaware of its presence. Access is hidden behind a wooden bookcase in a storeroom filled with boxes containing old candelabras and broken benches. Only a few selected guardians can descend, and that happens only once a year. Every summer, on the exact same day, one of them walks alone through the long underground passage, carrying nothing. He enters the crypt, stays there for a few minutes, then returns without saying anything. If you ask why this custom persists, the explanation is always the same: to confirm that it is still present. But what they are checking for is not gold, nor papers, nor relics of holy figures. It is a single white feather, always the same size, always the same shape, lying delicately on the stone, precisely in the centre of the space. No birds live in the Vatican crypts. There are no openings, no cracks in the walls, no air currents from outside. The environment is dry and static, too hidden for any living creature to reach. However, annually the feather appears, impeccable, intact, without dust or traces of aging. The first document about the feather dates back to 1765. In a note scribbled by a clergyman tasked with cleaning the underground areas, he noted discovering it and not giving it importance, until the next day, when he saw it again identically positioned. The third time, he was accompanied by another prelate. The latter subsequently requested that the crypt entrance be sealed. It remained closed for decades, but the feather reappeared. In the beginning of the last century, a new group of scholars reopened the crypt. They were young and curious, eager to investigate what they assumed was a common environment. When they discovered the feather, they were amused. But when it reappeared the following week, then the following year, and again after that, the hilarity faded. Now it is no longer discussed. The feather belongs to the memory of the crypt. Some believe it is a message of serenity, a gentle reminder that something divine silently watches from the darkness. Others imagine it is a warning, an image that even in the most remote spaces where no one walks,